Multi-phase forms are forms that have multiple steps or multiple stages, and they're ideal if you have a limited amount of space to dedicate to your form, or if the form that you have is very long, you might want to break it up into stages. And essentially, it could be used to display any HTML content in any custom sequence that you like. So if you happen to enjoy the workflow in this demonstration, be sure to catch the next video where we'll engineer an online test or online exam or quiz. And we'll start by putting the form element in the body of our document. Go down a couple of lines, make sure we close it. And we'll give this form an ID equal to Multiphase. And since we'll be submitting this form using JavaScript, we'll put onSubmit equals return false. So in case you put a submit button in your form, it won't allow the form to be submit in the normal way, because we're going to submit this form using JavaScript, and I'll explain more about that when the time comes. Now for this particular form, I'm just going to use divs to stage out the form, or to make the different phases of the form. So I'll type in div, go down a couple of lines and close that div. Now let's give that div an ID of phase 1, and then you just put all of the elements in your form that you want for phase 1 of your form. So in my phase 1, I'm going to have these two elements. They're input elements for taking in first name and last name. So you can see my input tags here, and they have ID of first name and name of first name. And the last name is the same. Now, when we process this form and submit it to our PHP parse file, that's where this name attribute is going to come into play. And that's how the posted variables are going to be scooped up using this name attribute. So your PHP script that parses this form is going to scoop up this variable name according to this attribute. Now the ID attribute we're using mainly just to communicate with these elements through JavaScript to make all the magic happen. That way we can get values out of them when we want to and things like that. So in my phase 1, I'm just gathering their first name and the user's last name. Now the button I have in place has the label of continue. So after they fill out their first name and last name, I want them to hit continue, and then the next stage of my form will come into view. Now the function I want to run when they hit this continue button is called process phase 1. So that function actually has to be in place in our JavaScript. So let's type in function process phase 1 opening curly brace and closing curly brace. Now as the different stages of the form are being processed by our JavaScript, we're going to be using some variables to hold or retain some data. So let's pop in these variables, and we're just initializing these variables in this way here. We're not giving them any initial values, we're just initializing those variables. We're going to give them values within the functions. Now just to make my program's code a little bit leaner, I'm also going to add this function. The function's name is underscore. It's in place so I don't have to call document.getElementById in my functions so many times. I won't have to use this string so many times. Okay, so now since we can use this function to access any elements that we want and get their value out, that's what we're going to do. So in function process phase 1, and this is going to occur right when the user clicks this continue button. Process phase 1 function is going to fire off when they click that continue button. And then this code is going to execute. You're going to take the value out of the first name and last name input elements down here. You're going to put those into these local variables, fname and lname. Then you can run an if condition to check the length of those strings just to make sure that it's 2 characters or more, or actually 3 characters or more. So if the first name length is greater than 2 characters and the last name length is greater than 2 characters, then we'll accept it and run some code to make the program continue. Else, if they're less than 3 characters, then you're going to run this alert to tell them please fill in the fields more. So now at this point, your fname and lname variables already have the value of what they typed into the field. So if you check the lengths and lengths are good, then you can run code like this. You just target the phase 1 div, which is this guy right here. You target the display CSS property. You make that equal to none, and that will make it disappear. Now immediately after that, you want to make a phase 2 element, which we don't even have on the page yet. I'm going to put that in place right after we put this line. You want to make a phase 2 element display equals block. Now the phase 2 element on the page will make it display none by default, so all the user will see is phase 1 when they arrive to the form. But when they click continue after filling out the fields in phase 1, then phase 1 is going to disappear and phase 2 is going to appear. So let's just go down into the HTML, and we have to have a phase 2 because our program is looking for one here. So we have to have that in place. Put a copy under it, change it to phase 2, and you can take out these lines, and in phase 2 we'll be gathering the user's gender. So what we have here is a select element with an ID of gender and name gender. And there's 3 option elements, and we have the first one being blank, so that forces them to choose one. They have to choose either male or female from the option list. Then the value that gets sent to JavaScript, when we scoop up that value out of this element, is going to be either M or F. Now inside of phase 2 we're going to have a button that's similar to the button in phase 1, but this button is going to call a function called process phase 2. Alright, so up in our JavaScript, right under process phase 1 function, we're going to put the process phase 2 function. And it's very similar to the process phase 1 function. So we just grab the gender value out of the select list, then we run an evaluation to see if the gender length is greater than 0. Then we're going to run the desired code for the program to continue. Else we alert them to say, please choose your gender. Now while they're filling out the form, as they're going through each stage, you're going to want to make sure that they're giving you the data that you need for each stage to continue. If they don't supply you with the data, you just want to give them an alert or some kind of error message on the page telling them to fill out the data. So what we do in the case that they give us the data and we're going to continue to the next phase is we just set phase 2 style display to none and open up phase 3 for them to fill out whatever fields we put in there. And we're also going to add a progress bar and a little status to show the user how many steps are left in the form. And we'll also give them a progress bar that'll be a good visual indication of how much they have left. Now it's also important that I mention that this function, process phase 1 and process phase 2, could be made more dynamic, and they could both be processed within the same function, which is something I'm going to be showing you how to do in the next tutorial, where we're building quizzes or exams that might have up to 100 questions. You don't want to have 100 different functions processing each one of your questions. You could make one function process all of the questions within an exam or a quiz or something like that. But I just wanted to break the functions out into different phases as well for beginners to grasp the concept of going step by step through each function. But rest assured that in the next video tutorial, where we're going to be building online exams or online tests, we're going to have one dynamic function that processes every single question of the test. And we're going to be using arrays to make everything a lot more dynamic. Okay, so now you're probably getting a little feel for what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to move a little faster. There's no need to go slow through the rest of this. Let's go ahead and pop in div with ID of phase 3. And in that one we have a select list in place so the user can tell us what country they live in. And the continue button for that phase is running a function. It's going to execute a function called process phase 3. Now my particular multi-phase form happens to only have 3 phases, and you can give yours as many phases as it needs. So inside of process phase 3, I'm going to put the country value from the select list on the page into the local country variable. Then I'll evaluate it to see if the length is greater than 0, so if there's some value there. Then I'm going to run the code, the desired code for the program to continue. Now you can just pop an else condition here on the end of this if condition like we did for the rest, if you want to make sure they give you their country value. Here, I'll just do it. We'll put else, please choose your country. Now, for the program to continue in this process phase 3 function, what we're doing is we're checking the length to make sure that they give us a value. Then we target the phase 3 element, which is the div that holds all the phase 3 input, and we set its style.display to none. That way it disappears from the page. And then we want to make a new div called show all data. We want to make that render to the page, so we make its display block. So let's go ahead and put that div in place right now called show all data. And what we're going to do is show the user like an overview of it. So I'll go down into my form, and under phase 3 div, or actually it could be outside of the form if you want. It doesn't matter. You can put it anywhere you want on the page. I'll just put it inside of my form. It's a div with an ID of show all data. And what I'm going to do is show in these span elements, they each have ID. This one has an ID of display F name for displaying the first name. This displays the last name, this displays the gender, and this displays the country. And they're just inline span elements. Now I can target those IDs with JavaScript and populate them with any text that I want, any data that I want. Now the button in this element, to where you show them an overview of all the data they gave you, then you want to have a button that says submit data, which is the final form submit, where it actually goes to the server, the data goes to the server and you process it. So you can have a function called submit form fire off, and I'm going to write that in 1 second and you'll see exactly what it looks like. But first we have to put data into these span elements to show them an overview of the data they gave us. So we go up into our JavaScript, and right under where we're making the show all data element display, we're going to put these lines that are going to target the span elements down there, and in their inner HTML we're going to put the variables. That way the user can see an overview of what they gave us within the whole multi-phase form. And you can extend this to have each phase could have as many inputs as you need, and you can have as many phases as you like. Alright, so now once we have the data, the overview of the data they gave us, they're going to press the submit button, and a submit form function needs to fire off. And that's very simple to do through JavaScript. All we're going to do is target that form. You can see our form has an ID of multiphase. So we target that element, that form on the page, and we make sure its method is equal to post. You can make that the get method if you want to make them URL variables, but I would just use post. And then we make the form's action equal to myparser.php. That way myparser.php can scoop up all of the form data and process it on the server. That way you can email it, stick it in a database, do whatever you want with the data at that point. And finally the last line is the multiphase form.submit, and that's what actually submits the form, and it will go to your parse file. Now, an alternative is to use an ajax request here and replace these 3 lines with an ajax request. Now, since we haven't applied any CSS at all, when you run this or test it, you're going to see that you see every phase of the form. You don't want that. It's because we haven't put any CSS in place to hide specific elements that need to be hidden by default at first when the page loads. So in our style element, let's target the multi-phase form itself, and let's give it a black border, let's give it some padding, and let's give it a specified width. You can change all of these values. Now what we'll do is make a rule that's going to target the multi-phase form elements with ID of phase 2, phase 3, and show all data are going to be displayed none. Now let's run that. Take a little test. See? Now you have just phase 1. And if I was to, let's see if it works. Put an Adam, my last name, Khoury, continue. And it continued to phase 2. I could pick my gender, male, continue. It continues to phase 3. And then if I choose my country, continue, I see an overview. And then when I submit all data, what's going to happen is all of the form data is going to be sent to myparser.php in a traditional sort of way, but we're just submitting the form through JavaScript. Now, like I said, if you want this to be an ajax request where it happens without the page reloading or anything, then you can use an ajax request right there to send all of the form variables to PHP. Now, I also told you that I'm going to show you how to put a progress bar and show the user how many steps there are and what step they're on, which are handy visual aids when you have something that's multi-stage or multi-steps. Okay, I'm just going to put it at the top of the page above my form. You can put it anywhere you want. You can put these things these two things inside of your form if you want. It doesn't matter. So what I did, I put a progress element and an H3 element. This H3 element is just really going to show text, and I can change this text at any time with my JavaScript by targeting this status ID, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Then for the progress element, I gave it an ID of progress bar. The starting value is 0, the max value is 100, and the style, I just gave it a width of 250 pixels, and you can also put that style up here with the rest of your CSS if you don't want it in the HTML directly like I put it here. So let's start up in process phase 1, and what we'll do is right after we make phase 2 display, we're going to change the progress bar's value to say 33. Now if yours happens to have 4 phases or 4 stages, you change this to 25. If your form has 10 stages, you change this to 10. So I'll just make it 33. Since I have 3 stages, I'm going to divide by 100 by 3. And that's the number I'll put here. So the progress bar's value is going to be a third of the way after the user gets finished with stage 1 or phase 1. And then in that status text, we're just going to put the string of phase 2 of 3. So you can see in the status text, it starts out saying phase 1 of 3 by default. That's the default text in it. Then after they press continue on phase 1, we're going to change that to say phase 2 of 3. Now we can just copy those lines since they're already all set up and go down into phase 2, the function that processes phase 2, and add those lines again, but change this to 66, and then change this to say phase 3 of 3, and then down in the process phase 3, we can just put a 100 here because that's the very last phase where we're showing them the overview of the data they gave us. So that could be 100 right there, and then the status could say data overview. Now let's run it in our favorite browser to make sure that we have a working multi-phase form with progress bar and status text and all that good stuff. So let's type in our first name and then our last name, continue, and you see when we continue, the progress bar gets a third of the way full because that part of the multi-phase form is complete. And then we put in the text that they're on phase 2 of 3. Then when they choose their gender, continue, the progress bar grows a little bit, and now they're on phase 3 of 3. Then they give us their country, United States, continue, and you fill up the progress bar completely by making it 100, and then you put in the text data overview, and then you just show them all the data they gave you, and then when they press submit data, this form is going to be submit to a myparser.php file, which I'm going to show you right now. Okay, here's myparser.php, and I made it very simple as to not overcomplicate this lesson about the multi-phase form. Now all this file is doing is seeing if the posted variable of first name is set. Then we're going to echo out all the variables from the form. That way you can be sure that your form is sending over all the data from the form over to your server-side script. Once you see all this data being populated here, echoing out in this script, then you know everything's working. Now, what you want to do is make sure you sanitize these variables first thing. If you happen to be making any database queries or even emailing any of this data, you'd want to make sure you sanitize it to make sure it has only the specific characters that you desire to be in the strings. You don't want to let the user put in funny characters like quote marks or equal signs without first escaping them or removing them altogether. So I'm going to have example.html. All this code will be available for you to copy and paste if yours happens to mess up. You want to see my exact code. And I tested mine in Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Chrome. Now my parser.php code is also going to be available under where the video plays at Develop PHP. It's going to be right under the example.html code. There's not much going on here, but if you need that code, you need to copy and paste that, I'll have that as well. Okay, so in the next video, what we're going to do is build a quiz or online exam or online test that can have as many questions as you want. And what we're going to do is just make our script a little more dynamic so we don't have to have a lot of JavaScript functions. We'll have one dynamic, beautiful function that powers the entire quiz or the entire full-length exam that you want to offer online or whatever. So it'll have some differences from the way we set things up in this tutorial. It'll be a little bit more dynamic, and we'll be using some arrays to hold the questions and things like that.
If you enjoyed the video you just watched, click on the subscribe button to tune into Adam's channel. He produces new videos on a regular basis. Below the subscribe button are a few more of his video tutorials that other viewers have found to be helpful or inspiring. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.